Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to The View from the Afternoon. Say it with me, the internet's most consistent podcast. Aside from Jack, mate, who's done over 600 in a row now. I think maybe we're the second most consistent podcast. Today, I want to talk about something that I've wanted to talk about for ages. And it might be self-indulgent. And it might not be particularly interesting, but it's just some kind of stuff that I want to share with you about my old job. Now, when I was working full time in retail, the number one question that we would get on the channel by a long shot is like, "What do you do for work?" And obviously, I always kept that a secret, or I certainly tried to. But now most people know that I worked mainly in retail, and I worked for a few different retailers. I worked for Apple, I worked for Game, I did some door-to-door sales, which I mean, if you want to hear about that, let me know. Terrible. I worked in Spud You Like, making baked potatoes. I worked in a factory making orthopedic shoes for a month. But I want to talk today about my time at Currys. So what I want to preface this conversation with, and well, first of all, I was waiting to have this I wanted to talk about this for years, but I wanted to do it with someone else, and I just wasn't sure who else to do it with, because if it's another one of the crew, then they've, nothing to really add in terms of, context. And then if I was to do it with like one of my old colleagues, it's not really very interesting. And it's not great optics for them if they're still in, conventional work. So I thought just have the conversation with you by myself. So I worked at Currys from 2014 to 2017. So a little while ago. For anyone listening that doesn't know, Currys is a major electronics retailer on the high street in the United Kingdom. It's gone through many iterations. It currently exists just as Currys, but it incorporates Dixons. If anyone remembers Dixons from the UK high street, maybe 20 years ago, it incorporates PC World. It incorporates Carphone Warehouse, and basically it's kind of the final spawn of like all of these companies existing kind of opposite each other, and then as kind of half merged companies, and then that is basically the DNA of all those British High Street stores rolled into one, and its main competitors are John Lewis and online, really, companies like AO. So I worked at Currys for those 3 and a bit years, and while I had some good memories and do have some good memories, and there was some good individuals that worked there, Currys was such a shit company to work for. That's why I've been really eager to have this conversation. Never have I known of a company, and this might just be me demonstrating being sheltered, or maybe I've been a bit lucky with where I've worked, but never have I seen a company care less about its customers. And as someone who, I don't want to sound like cringe or cliche, but like I'm so customer service driven and passionate about that. And I've never seen a company that's still relatively successful on the high street that just truly does not care about its customers. Now, this might have changed now. If you can believe, like Currys' social media, like they seem to have like this kind of new hip kind of relatable image, but I will generally try and avoid spending any money at Currys if I can. And when I do have to, the experience that I've had over the last kind of 3 or 4 years, buying a printer, buying a tripod, trying to buy a Dyson, has been atrocious. So I am going to be kind of slamming them a little bit. Um, they're also not really great looking after the staff either. So I was working in a store in the White Rose shopping centre. The store's no longer there now, and it was like there's different sizes of these stores. So there's like mega stores or whatever they call them, which is like a big destination shop on like a retail park, and it sells fridge freezers and ovens and washing machines, all your kind of white goods like that. It'll also sell computers like desktops and laptops, computing accessories. It'll sell cameras like digital SLR cameras. It'll sell big TVs, have a big selection of TVs. It's basically like, if you just bought an empty house, all your kind of anything electronic you would get from there. My store was a little different because it was what's known as a high street store. So it was a significantly smaller footprint, and it didn't sell desktops. It only sold laptops, with the exception of iMacs. It didn't have any large white goods, or even really any white goods. Seasonally, it would get maybe like coffee machines in around Christmas time. But what we had in the store was a modest selection of televisions. We had significant amount of laptops. We had miscellaneous accessories like power banks, cables. We had a row of cameras, digital SLR cameras and point and shoot cameras. We had a technical desk. Which was where like you would go and get help and stuff. You would, like, if you needed help with your computer. And then we had like an aisle of printers, which was definitely a waste of space in a unit that small. And then we had like the most boring aisle, which was like landline telephones, and I can't remember what else was on there, but it was like routers and networking equipment and stuff. So I interviewed for my job at Curry's as a entry-level sales assistant, and the guy that interviewed me, great guy, really do. I mean, I've not spoke to him for over a decade, but really, really had a lot of time for him, and he was very good to me. And I interviewed apparently so well that I was kind of encouraged into like the management kind of progression arc, almost kind of straight away, much to the frustration of some of the other team members there, which I totally get. But let me tell you a little bit about what it's like being a sales assistant at Curry's. So at Curry's, you exist purely to sell high margin attachments on products. Now, I appreciate that that's business, and every business needs to have good margins to succeed. But I mean, like, to a poisonous scale. So an example is if you walk into my store and you want to buy a laptop computer, chances are you're walking into Curry's because you're probably not that up on your tech. So consequently, you probably aren't looking for a high-end machine, and therefore you're probably going to be gravitating towards the cheaper end of the spectrum. The cheapest laptops we would have in were maybe like £130. The most expensive laptops we'd probably have on site were maybe like £750. So in the laptop computer space, there wasn't anything really high end. The £750 models would be pseudo high end. Maybe they have an i7, 8 gigs of RAM at the time, but they would have like your money was coming from like unnecessary touchscreen or gimmicky biometric scanners and half magnesium enclosures and stuff. You weren't getting any serious compute performance in really any of the machines in our store. So we attracted a much more kind of what's the word, like a low level requirement pool, if you will. Now, I'm not just trying to make an excuse here, but I would always do 100% right by the customer. I was already in a management pipeline from pretty much as soon as I got in the door. So my sales numbers, I was fortunate enough that my sales numbers were never super scrutinized. But for most people working in that shop, if you can't double the transactional value of someone looking for a laptop, then it's literally better and advantageous for that customer to walk out of the shop having not bought anything. So an example is these cheap laptops that at the lowest end of the spectrum, little HPs, they were little 13-inch HPs, and they had like 32 gigs of RAM, and they're proper shitters, but like if you're just browsing the web, then they're sufficient, But if you sell one of them without any attachments, as they call it in retail, then you're kind of marked down on the system. And when you sell a laptop at PC World, Curry's PC, I might fluctuate the name here, Curry's PC World, blah, blah, blah. You're immediately, you've got 11 individual attached measurements to add on to that laptop sale. Now, I can't remember all 11, and I've really tried to find a list, but because it's internal, it's quite hard to find that. And I don't have any photos from back then that shows this information. But let's say your mother, who's 50, who doesn't know all about tech, and she needs a laptop for Facebook, and she goes in and she's entrusting a Curry's member of staff to recommend the right product. That Curry's member of staff is thinking, and not everyone, but I've seen this firsthand across tens of staff members, and I have received this service as well myself recently. But if I went in and I was looking at like a £400 machine, like middle of the road, like standard, like 400 quid laptop, and I've told that person in Curry's that my budget peaks at 400 quid, regardless of what my needs are as a customer, they are going to be downselling you to a machine that's way shitter and probably won't do what you need it to do in order to build back up to the top of your budget with add-ons and accessories. So when you're selling a laptop at Curry's, some of the attachments that the system will automatically report to everyone in the store. Everyone checks this report after every sale, and it says, has Rob sold one laptop, one unit of computing hardware, but these are some of the attachments that you need to add. So the first thing is the overall revenue is measured. So, you want to be like top of the sales board, which is it's not a very customer focused thing. At Apple, you can't even see that information as a sales assistant. You need to be manager level before you can look at that stuff. But in Curry's, the sales assistants are always on that pulse, always looking, how much have I done? How much have they done? So you got your top level revenue. Then you've got antivirus. So you need to attach with a computer an antivirus. If you don't do that, then you're kind of marked down. And the antivirus is priced really predatorily. It's really poorly, illegally priced almost, because the standard antivirus that we would sell with our computers was a McAfee 1-year subscription, and it's priced at $79.99. It's 80 quid. But you are equipped with a load of tools on your till to discount products. So what you can say is, listen, you're buying this laptop, you need antivirus with it. Even when they didn't need antivirus, right? If they're buying a Chromebook, if they're buying a Mac, still, you're going to need antivirus with this machine. So it's 80 quid, yeah? You show it to the customer at 80 quid. You make sure to point to the price. This is what they teach you. And then on your till, you can actually reduce that to 20 quid. So it's up to the sales assistant to decide this customer's really not biting. Shall I bring it down to 20 quid so it sounds like a deal? Or if the customer understands that maybe I do need an antivirus and they're kind of already in on the 80 quid, maybe I could knock it down to 20 quid and add 4 on. They're paying 80 quid. They're getting 4 years worth. And then if that sales assistant has sold 3 laptops already without any antivirus, that 4 that they've manipulated onto that sale is going to cover all those that they've sold, because it's kind of based on percentages, if that makes sense. So antivirus, even when absolutely not required. Selling antivirus with iPads, guys, like, it's an attach when you buy an iPad to sell an antivirus software from McAfee. I don't know if you know anything about these products. I don't need to tell you how stupid that is. The other thing that was often paired with the antivirus in a bundle was cloud storage. Now, I don't think Currys has this brand anymore, but it had this internal brand called Know-How, which is like services provided by Currys infrastructure, or like, you know, repairs on site were Know-How revenue. Cloud storage, like Currys cloud storage service, was Know-How revenue. And the Know-How Cloud was a cloud service package that sales assistants were encouraged to sell with iPads, tablets, anything that connects to the internet. And what was encouraged was, instead of, if a customer has a budget for an iPad Air 2 at 399 quid. No, sorry. Let's say they've got a £500 budget for an iPad Air 2. And you've understood their use case, and you really think they could do with a 32 gig model. Instead of selling them the better product for them with 32 gig, sell them the 16 gig model and add on this Know-How cloud storage. So the way this cloud storage worked is you would get 2 terabytes of cloud storage and 5 years of usage of that 2 terabytes. And it was priced middle of the road. I think it was like 100 quid, but you could knock it down to 60 if memory serves when bought with a unit of hardware. But you had to go through like a Currys website to like upload to this cloud service. It wasn't integrated into the iPad, for example. Of course it wasn't. So to increase your Know-How revenue and your cloud attach, sales assistants were encouraged to undersell the amount of storage in the machine, like sell the customer less than they need, and convince that customer that this cloud solution, which was janky, relies on servers that might not even exist today, and just inherently is not as accessible or usable as onboard storage, sell them this instead. And as I say it out loud, it's just insane. Like someone using an iPad, the most simple tool at the time, you know, to get on the internet, and you just might need a bit more storage because you're taking loads of photos and downloading loads of apps. Apps which, bear in mind, can't go on to this cloud storage. And you're kind of telling the customer, actually get something that's worse than you need and then bump it up with this shitty added on Currys' own cloud service. Because as soon as that customer's out the door, that product's non-refundable, and it don't matter because it shows on your figures that you have got a cloud attach and some Know-How revenue. Another thing that was much less predatory but still targeted was B2B, which means business to business. So capturing business revenue and business data was important, and it is important in a lot of retail still. And when you are transacting, whatever that transaction might be, you would ask your customer, and the till would even prompt you at the start of the transaction, is this customer a business customer? And you would ask the customer, and the customer might say yeah, or they might say no. And if they say yeah, then you flag that box and you transact it just as you would. Or that's how a good system would work. B2B was targeted for all staff members, but for some reason on the Currys till, you had to use like a totally separate transacting platform to transact B2B sales. The standard till software for serving anyone was a nice big touchscreen interface till software. It's quite good, to be honest. The business-to-business transacting software was a really complex, not touchscreen optimized piece of kit called Maginus. And this Maginus software had its own separate login that each staff member had to have, their own individual one, as well as their own standard till login. And it was just really janky. And if you were working at Currys and you weren't a nerd, which a lot of the staff weren't, it was really difficult to get your head around. Being a nerd, I had no problem transacting using this software. But the issue is, there was zero training at any point how to use this software. So when I got there was like 2 staff members that knew how to use it, 2 staff members that had been there for a long time. And wanting to equip myself with as much, utility as possible, I asked them to show me how to use it. And that was the extent of the training. So the staff just aren't shown how to use this transacting tool to transact stuff that they're targeted on. So what happens is you have to do a lot of transacting on other staff members' behalf instead of, and I was always trying to train people, do you want to learn how to use Maginus? Like, you need to learn how to use this tool to do your transaction. But it was really complicated and quite daunting for a lot of people. So often you'd get someone come up to you and go like, Rob, can you serve this customer for me? It's business. And they've already done all the conversation and arrived on the final product, like what it is. I'm just doing the transactionary thing. But it's just an example of just how poorly the ship was run. Like, you're targeting staff on this top level KPI of business sales, and the staff don't even know how to do that. And the 2 or 3 members of staff in the building that can use that then have to do it on your behalf. And the frustration there is, it's not particular frustration for me, but if I'm transacting on that customer's behalf, I'm doing it on my login, which means I'm essentially robbing this colleague of their sale. I was never territorial about sales, but some people in Currys are really bad for it. Some people, it's a case of like, come back in and ask for me. It's really like cringe. And, there was a time where there was this guy, and I believe he's still in the business now, and he was like a real old school kind of salesman and knew nothing about the products, nothing about the tech, but just knew kind of what Currys had told him and knew how to upsell. And he spent like half an hour talking to this customer like a few weeks back about a TV. And this customer was interested in this TV, and this was a really high-end TV. I think it was like $3,000. It was like an ordering job. This customer comes back in. Turns out it's my girlfriend's dad, who had no idea I worked there. And I'm like, let me do you the staff discount on this. It's going to cost you it's going to save you like 300 quid. So I run it through with my staff discount, and this guy that had like discussed this TV with this guy, like this colleague, was furious. And I can kind of understand that, and I know that exists a bit in like car dealerships and stuff, but it shouldn't be about that. And if you was in Apple Store, I'll use as an example, which is the polar opposite of this, and if you want a conversation about Apple, I'll have one with you. because I do have a lot to criticize there as well. But like, you wouldn't dream of like ever interrupting that customer's flow with like a "that's my sale" conversation. It's so cringe. Another thing that was really popular, not really popular, but really heavily targeted when buying a computer was warranties, extended warranties. Now, we had these at Game, but at PC World, Curry's PC World, they worked a little bit differently. They were called Care Plan, and you needed 40% attached to be like a good performing colleague at Curry's. And you could pay up front for your Care Plan, or you could pay monthly. And there was a real predatory way that people would increase their Care Plan attach, which was at the point of sale at the till, you scan the laptop in and you add on without the customer's consent. And this was encouraged in my store, okay? And I know it might sound like I'm trying to save face, but I didn't do this. This was actively encouraged, and a behavior that was displayed daily. You would scan in the laptop. It says, does the customer want to buy the Care Plan? You would say yes. It would say, is the customer paying in full, 100 quid, or do they want to pay like 3 quid a month? You choose the 3 quid a month option. And it adds the first 3 quid onto the transaction at that point. So then people would discount 3 quid off the laptop itself. So the transaction is what the customer is expecting. Let's say the laptop was 200 quid, the Care Plan's 3 quid. Customer's going to be confused if they're paying 203 quid. They're expecting to pay 200. Knock 3 quid off the laptop, it adds back up. At that point, the customer puts their card into the reader, which does something called a card mandate, which there was 2 ways to capture card details. There was a direct debit or a card mandate. And manipulative members of staff would choose the card mandate option because with a direct debit option, you would then have to give the customer a form to sign the direct debit guarantee. With a card mandate, you can keep the customer in the dark still. So they've put the card into the reader, ready to pay, and the till has taken those card details and set up a card mandate, which is kind of like a direct debit for that 3 quid a month. The customer pays, and people would then tell the customer, by the way, you've got a month of complimentary coverage, insurance on this product, and it will renew in a month. So just call this number and cancel within a month and you won't be billed. But within your first month, you have that for free. Sounds like you've done them a favor. But if you know anything about like insurance sales, you realize what an insane red flag that is. It's literally illegal to do that. And what the sales assistant is hoping is that they're not going to cancel that. They get home, they open up their laptop, they're excited. They don't even know they've got that product, really. They just think it comes with the thing. And more often than not, customers wouldn't cancel it. And if they didn't cancel it after 3 months, I believe there was some kind of extra retention-based points that the colleague would get. And, you know, what an insane way to do business. If a customer was buying something without any attachments, it was known internally as a flat sale, selling something flat. So it wasn't uncommon where if a colleague was having a really bad day and they hadn't done a load of manipulative attach. I'm not saying there's not use cases where a customer would need an antivirus or would benefit from a warranty. There definitely is. And all retailers sell these products. And there's a reason these products exist. But the way that it was taught and displayed at Curry's was terrible. But anyway, if a sales assistant was having a particularly bad day and hadn't done a load of attachments, they would sometimes say to me, like, can you run this flat sale through? Because by this point, I'm like I forget what the actual name, or team leader is what I was. So while my sales numbers were measured still, I had way more leeway. You know, I wasn't going to be put on a performance plan. And I was like, I'm a firm believer of, like, if you treat the customer right and respect the customer, the law of averages will deliver you on your numbers. So I would often transact on other people's behalf a flat sale because it wasn't worth this sales colleague who's already connected with this customer, who's already got the rapport, who's already discovered the customer's need. It's better for them to just hand the customer off to another random person that they've got no rapport with, rather than impact their own figures. And as someone who thinks customer journey is really important, you can tell I'm a real nerd for retail. I love retail. It's just it's so shit for the customer that the customer should come in and they're making a considered purchase and they should be celebrated and you should drum up some excitement. There was select members of the team that were just cashiers, like weekend workers, 8-hour contracts maybe. And instead of serving these customers themselves, they would understand the customer's needs, aka how much can I rip this customer off? And if they couldn't get anything out of that customer, they would just send them to the front to just transactionally buy this laptop for 400 quid. Because the cashiers weren't, while their targets did report in the same way, they weren't understood or expected to be doing these kind of sales. Here's another thing that was targeted at Curry's PC World, and I didn't know how this story would flow. I've got a lot of bullet points, and I've got like maybe 10 much more kind of fun and funny and laughable anecdotes about customer interactions I've personally had. But I didn't expect to kind of get so pissed off talking about this stuff. I forgot how bad it was, even though I wrote it down. So we might not have time for the fun anecdotes. If you want to hear them, if you want to hear about how I ruined a little girl's belief in Santa, if you want to hear about how I saw a Porsche salesman's knob, then please let me know if these stories from retail podcasts are worthwhile. But because we might not have time with this one. This next thing is another completely insane way to operate a business. And it's the offering of a setup service. Now, let me tell you how it should work. At Apple, if you go into an Apple store and you buy an iPad or a Mac or an iPhone, you offer that customer, do you want to set it up in the store? We've got a dedicated member of the team who today, it's their day, helping everyone set stuff up. And you sit around a table in a lovely environment in the Apple store, and in a one-to-many scenario, as in I might be running the setup table, whoever's opted to have their stuff set up, you sit them down, you introduce yourself, and you have a great time showing them how to set up their device. And you're bouncing around the table, showing Joyce how to do Touch ID. They always get the fucking Touch ID wrong, how to set that up. And then maybe chatting to, you know, Angela, who's a business owner who's had loads of iPhone before, but she just wants to make sure that the transfer goes right. And so she's using the store Wi-Fi. And it's a great free service. Let me tell you how Curry's does it. So if you're buying a laptop, well, let's say you're buying a £220 Toshiba, 4 gig RAM, 500 gig hard drive, cheap plastic, literally like bargain bin 15.4 inch laptop. SKU, if anyone was wondering, 103,499. We shifted these out of the door non-stop because they were the cheapest full-size laptop. Setup was offered to our customers as a paid service. Now, setup, while being separately measured as an attachment, also contributed towards your know-how revenue. Remember I said there's this know-how revenue? This was part of that. And if you're selling a laptop, there was 3 different setup options. The first one is priced at £35. The second one, £45. And the third one, £55. Now, quite often, what Currys would do, store by store, by the way, this is not come down from the top. They would take this cheap laptop that they know, okay, everyone's going to buy this. It's going to kill our quality for the day. It's going to kill our sales because people are going to come in, they're going to buy this cheap laptop, and they're not going to want to buy these added value services, as so they were called. So let's create a bundle. So you would have like boxes on the shop floor of this laptop, like kind of positioned in a way where kind of that's what the customer sees as opposed to the actual laptop just on its own. And it would be like a £400 bundle, and it would be like the box of the laptop with like stuck to it like an antivirus, a cloud, and like a setup leaflet. And it was that kind of thing. They did this at Game as well. And I think it is illegal, especially when you're bundling in an insurance product, but it might not be strictly illegal. It might just be like super frowned upon. But the idea is like, this is the product, not the laptop on its own. That's almost not available unless you push. This is the product, and it's all this stuff bundled in. So with setup, there was 3 levels, as I mentioned. If a customer paid the £35 setup, they received a laptop that before that point of sale had been opened out of its box, turned on, set up as like a blank user, and had its recovery media created, which means there was a USB stick provided that had like the Windows recovery software. So if you ever need to like reinstall Windows from scratch, you've got your recovery media. There is some value in that. However, with Windows 8 and Windows 10, there were a lot of instances where you could do that anyway without the need for this stick. The downside is the customer's paying 35 quid for this recovery media. If they're paying for that, it means they're probably a novice. They receive no training on how to use or utilize or boot from that recovery media stick. And they get a laptop that's been opened, that's been handled, and that's had like a blank user set up on it. So they open their laptop and they don't get any of the welcome to Windows, what's your name, what's your password, do you want to create any other users? They've got a laptop that's kind of set up in the worst way for 35 quid. Now for 45 quid, this is where there's some more value added, and I can understand this, but it's the way this was done that's insane. This wasn't in the early 2000s. This was, not too many years ago that this was happening. Probably still is. I'd love to know. This next level at £45 was, we'll do all of the aforementioned recovery stick thing, while also we'll set up your accounts, your social accounts, your email. We will actually configure the laptop how you want it to a degree, which sounds good. But the way this was done, is insane. So you transact the laptop. It's once again one of those open ones that's had the recovery media created. And then the customer has to leave and come back when the laptop is set up, which makes sense. How do you get all the customer's credentials though? Not just what they'd like their desktop background to maybe be and what kind of apps do they want installing in the form of like maybe Chrome or maybe like VLC. But how does this customer tell this Currys staff member all their personal email password, Facebook password, all their credentials? How is this information communicated? So what you do, this is 2017, you would print out a piece of paper that had like boxes on it, and the customer in pen would write down all their personal information. Their email password, what they wanted their account password to be, their phone number, every piece of personal information that you would not want a stranger to know, they would provide. And then the setup technician, who wasn't really wasn't like trained strictly to be a setup technician. There was a few that I worked with, and the ones that spring to mind, I can think of 3 of them. Each one of them, legends, real good people, really, really good to talk to. And some of my better friends at the time of working there. This is not a hit piece on them, and it's not a demonstration of their skills or their ability, but this is the way that the company operated. The technical desk was right next to the till, right? It's in a totally visible area of the store. And technicians would put the laptop on this desk and have the sheet of paper with all this customer's personal information right there on the desk next to the laptop to reference when setting up the computer. At any point, another customer or another staff member could walk up to that till to be served and possibly see that information, or could walk up to the technical desk and without a doubt see this information. Now, I'm not saying that they're looking for this information or that they're going to steal this piece of paper, but what an insane idea and what a charlatan way to conduct an operation. If I was setting up my mum's mate in the pub iPad, I would conduct better security than that. You know, you've got customers providing their online banking details, and it's just written down. Let's say the laptop's set up, it's all well and good. There you go, customer. What then happens to the piece of paper with all the customer's information on? Because we didn't have a fucking shredder. Oh, well, we did, but it was in the manager's office. That just goes in the bin. It just goes right in the bin. It's insane. It's insane. There was an extra level of setup that I mentioned, which was £55. And this came with all of the aforementioned stuff, but it also came with what was called a show how, which was a 30-minute demonstration on how to use the machine. Now, this was really popular around the Windows 10 launch because, was it Windows 10? Windows 10 or Windows 10, yeah. Because customers typically hadn't used Windows 10, obviously, it's just launching. So they would get some kind of walkthrough on how to use the machine. And I don't really have an issue with this. I think it's quite overpriced, and half an hour is you do need to put a cap on the amount of time you can dedicate to a customer, but half an hour probably isn't enough for someone who can't just figure it out on their own. They're probably going to need an hour. But my issue with this is that there was no like real training on how to deliver this. You know, you would think like a good company would maybe try and partner with Microsoft. And believe me, we worked with Microsoft a lot for stuff like sales-based stuff. But like you would think that Microsoft would maybe want to deliver a training to all the Currys staff to say, this is perfectly how to explain Windows 10 in half an hour. But that just didn't really happen. And you were then, as a customer, depending on which technician you got, potentially getting a totally different style, different enthusiasm, and different kind of blueprint of setting up or how to use the computer. Just not, you know, at Apple, and I'm obviously drawing comparisons to a $3 trillion company here, but I think, you know, every company should strive to do the best job that they can. And, you know, Currys had the resource to do this. But at Apple, they have like free sessions where if you want to learn how to use a certain thing, there's probably a session for that. And you can rock up and someone whose job it is to teach you that, who's been trained, who's practiced, who, you know, they can deliver an amazing experience in that same kind of field. And yeah, so that's the setup. There's a couple more things I want to talk about. I want to rant about on this one. The most ridiculous and most difficult thing to attach to this was big with, well, it was targeted heavily when buying a tablet, whether that be an iPad or a £100 Android tablet, was mobile broadband. So this was in the time where these mobile broadband dongles were getting kind of not popular. They were never popular, but like they were becoming a bit more mainstream. Currys, realizing the amount of revenue and kickback that they could get from a network, targeted all their staff. Whenever you're selling like a unit of any kind of compute hardware that connects to the internet, I think it was like 10%, so 1 in 10 should have broadband sold with it. So you can imagine how difficult that is, because customer comes in, they've probably already got the internet. They're probably in a contract that they can't get out of. Or they're probably apathetic, if that's the word. And they're not really bothered about changing providers to save 10 quid. Also, the solution you're presenting them is a mobile broadband dongle. So it's a SIM card with, say, EE. 3 did them as well. And there's different plans and different allowances just with like a phone contract. So it's not like the internet at home where, you know, you're essentially getting unlimited internet broadband at home. This is like a 4G hotspot that staff are targeted to sell. Again, I'm not saying there's not a use case where this might be a viable option. But in typical Currys fashion, it was just not sold in the right way. So you would have stuff like a customer that maybe wants to buy a cellular iPad, okay, an iPad that can take a SIM card and connect to a 3G or 4G or 5G network. That might be the perfect solution for that customer. But a manipulative sales associate will downsell them to a Wi-Fi only iPad and add on the mobile broadband dongle to retrofit that iPad with some kind of portable internet. Instead of the built-in one that works perfectly, sell them this shitty dongle that the iPad can connect to. Now, this wasn't done in a way as bad as like the warranties, because you needed to go through a full contract and set like, you know, agreement with the customer to sign up for this. But it was like often not the right answer for the customer. The customer probably just wanted to sling a SIM card in the iPad and just rock and roll and not have to worry about it. Instead, they're getting this clunky piece of non-Apple hardware that now has to be a companion to this iPad at all times, that definitely isn't as fast or as good of a modem as what's built into the iPad already, that has like its separate plan. Yeah, you can connect other devices to it, and as I say, there are use cases where that might be the right thing. But it was just an impossible sell. And Currys would do this thing where they'd be like, right, today, Jack, you're the mobile broadband guy. And you would, Jack in this case, who's a made-up person, would stand at the front of the shop wearing a special shirt that said like mobile broadband, wearing the dongle around their neck. And they just have to kind of push this onto customers, and customers just didn't want this. Like, it's just, while it is a solution that you can definitely see that there's a solution for, that there's a use case for, like, it was just pushed onto customers that didn't need it for the sake of ticking a box for the sales assistant. Possibly the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of the operations and the behaviors of this store. And let me just pause and say that I can think of more great people that I worked with in that shop than I can wankers. There was certainly some wankers in there, as there is everywhere. But some of the people that I worked with at Currys, I really did connect with. And while I've not spoken to them in years, if a group chat was made tomorrow and it was like, shall we all go and get a drink and talk about Currys, it would be something I would love. So I'm not trying to straight up slander everyone I worked with. Some great people in there, some really good people with their heart in the right place, and not everyone was just out for themselves. I want to make that clear. But there is a team that was more out for themselves than anyone. And this is a team we've not talked about yet, because my store, while being a small high street store, it had a little extra bonus feature. It had an ensuite built-in car phone warehouse. Now, for those of you that don't know, Car Phone Warehouse was a mobile phone retailer. It was the leader of the high street in selling mobile phone contracts. It wasn't really interested in selling hardware on its own because there wasn't a lot of margin in that. It was all about selling mobile phone contracts. A lot of you listening might be in a mobile phone contract right now. It's an accessible way to get a new phone. You pay monthly for it. I'm nothing against phone contracts. I used phone contracts for over a decade. It is more expensive over the course of the 2 or 3 year plan, but it is the norm. Okay, it is still the norm. So we had a Car Phone Warehouse in our store. Now, Car Phone Warehouse is the same company as Currys, but, and this is the mental thing, the Car Phone Warehouse staff are on commission. So they're in the same building as you. They're roaming the Currys store, seeking out customers that might want to buy a phone contract to then take them to the little Car Phone Warehouse wall of the store. But they get a commission. So you can imagine the kind of vibe in the store when you've got some employees on commission and some not. But for every frustration that the Currys staff had at the Car Phone Warehouse staff for being on commission, the Car Phone Warehouse staff had their own frustrations. And I'm not exaggerating here, but this little shop within a shop, Car Phone Warehouse, inside my Currys store, was next door to a clothing shop. And then one unit across from that was the biggest Car Phone Warehouse unit in the entire company. It was in the White Rose Shopping Centre, and it was the highest turnover, highest revenue, and largest footfall Carphone warehouse. So in our little Currys store, you have a Carphone warehouse that is competing on the region with the best and biggest, which is 2 retail units away. So imagine it's iPhone launch day, yeah, iPhone 6S launch day. The little Carphone warehouse in the Currys shop had a stock cupboard that's smaller than the cupboard that I keep my fucking cables in this podcast studio. So you can imagine the amount of stock that they were allocated. It was minimal. So every single customer, pretty much, that wanted a phone from this Carphone warehouse would end up being told, sorry, we don't have that. But the customer would then go, well, there's a massive Carphone warehouse 2 doors down. Have they got it? That's really common practice, you know. If our Currys store doesn't have something, the customer would often say, what about this store? What about this one? You know, they're willing to travel. They're willing to go get it. And I don't know if that's still the same kind of behavior that customer demonstrates, but they were certainly willing to go to different stores to pick up stock if it wasn't available in that unit. So the Carphone warehouse staff member is in my store is then faced with a challenge because they want this commission. So they check their till, which ran like its own system. It was like DOS. It was like text-based user interface. And they would maybe see that the Carphone warehouse, 50 yards across the way, has 100 iPhone 6Ss ready and primed. So the colleague would then say, wait there to the customer, go into the Carphone warehouse unit next door and say, yo, can we have some of your stock? Can you do us like a stock transfer? And more often than not, this is a commission-based thing. The staff member in that big store would say, nope, send the customer this way. Because they want the commission, they want the sale, they want the opportunity to sell the mobile phone insurance. So this isn't really super detrimental to the customer, because the customer only has to walk over the road, they're still getting a phone, and the sales tactics weren't super predatory at Carphone warehouse compared to Currys. Oftentimes customers did want insurance or would benefit from insurance on a phone. It was harder to falsely sell to them than it was in the Currys arm of the store. And the only other attach really was like cases and stuff. And usually like a screen protector or a case is something a customer's going to want to protect their new investment. This practice was insanely unfair on the actual staff. So it's kind of, I'm less empathetic for the customer now, more empathetic for the staff. And I remember this guy who was getting hammered from shitty regional managers saying, why are you not selling anything? Why are your contracts down? And the guy literally just can't. He's just not set up for success at all. And what often happened as a key holder to this Currys store is someone had, and it was like poetic injustice. A customer would rock in 5 minutes before the shop closed and be like, can I get a phone on contract? It's like a half an hour process. So then as the key holder, I've got to keep myself, one other staff member, and this Carphone staff member in the store so this staff member can sell a contract, because they might not sell one again for 2 more days. And we don't get overtime. There's no overtime in this thing. But like, I'm then faced with the choice of, do I sacrifice half an hour of my time after a long ass shift so this guy can overwork to increase his number so he doesn't get shouted at? And sometimes I would, and sometimes I would say, sorry, I've got to go home. And Just such a terrible fucking place to be. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. As you can tell, I get tremendously frustrated with stuff like this. And I really hope things have changed, because Curry's is still a staple of the high street. But I really do hope if you go into Curry's, you know, if one person learns anything about big box electronic retail, you know, from this, then it was worth having. Check your receipts. Make sure that you're not being sold something that you don't need. Speak to your family member before who knows about tech before you speak to a sales assistant, or buy your shit from Apple or John Lewis. If you want me to continue this conversation and tell you a little bit about some of those more fun stories that I have, along with, you know, maybe some other anecdotes from my time in Curry's, please do let me know. I love talking about this stuff. I'm really passionate about customer service, and I'm embarrassed to have worked for a company while I avoided these practices as much as I could. And I know it's easy to say that, but I truly did. I was blessed with an almost invincibility cloak. I'm embarrassed that I worked there, but it was a time in my life where I just had to. And customers should always come first, to a degree. Oh, well, thanks so much for listening to another episode of The View from the Afternoon. I've got a bit more work to do, but I've loved the conversation. It's been riveting for me, and I will catch you on the next one. Thanks so much, and bye-bye.